What are your biggest risk factors in birth? I love the quote, "What door you enter." Welcome back to the Orgasmic Birth Podcast. I'm Deborah Pascali-Bonaro, your host and director of the award-winning documentary Orgasmic Birth, The Best Kept Secret. Today, we're talking about a topic that is essential for every essential parent. What are your biggest risk factors? Where you give birth and with whom. So you have a choice of your birthplace and your birth team, and they will significantly impact not only the outcome of your birth, but how you feel about it emotionally and the physical experience you have. So let's explore some key questions to ask the information you need to prepare for a safe, respectful, and empowered birth. So number one, location, location, location. Where you give birth matters. You have the choice of hospitals, birth centers, and home birth, and they all offer different environments, different policies, and very different approaches to care. And these differences can significantly impact your experience. So let's start with hospitals. So many people I meet, they just assume from day one they're pregnant, they're going to a hospital because they think that's what everybody does. Now, hospitals can provide immediate access to medical interventions that can be life-saving in certain situations, but they also come with a higher likelihood of unnecessary interventions. This can include inductions, continuous fetal monitoring, cesarean births, and more. A fact that Consumer Reports study found that your odds of having a cesarean can be over 9 times higher depending on the hospital you choose. And this is even more troubling because if the type of care you receive varies this greatly from one hospital to another, then we know that perinatal care is not standardized and always providing the best evidence-based outcomes. So if they really were following the same guidelines, we'd see more consistency, but this is not the case. So if you're in the US, I highly recommend checking out Leapfrog's hospital survey. It evaluates and publicly reports on key maternity services. They let you know about the availability of midwives and doulas in hospitals in your region. Are there lactation consultants for breastfeeding support? Policies around VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean, that we've talked a lot about in the past. What is the rate of cesarean birth of each of the hospitals in your community? Leapfrog also reports on whether a hospital has a policy to prevent early elective deliveries. These are scheduled cesareans or inductions before 39 weeks, which are known to increase risks for both mother and baby. So as you can see, there's a lot of work to do in understanding how different hospitals operate and how their policies might impact you and your baby. So too many people just go to the nearest one, assuming they're all the same. And I hope you'll really hear me. I would tell you, if you're within a 30 to even an hour driving distance to more than one facility, I would visit each of them and make sure you're doing your homework. You may be amazingly surprised how different they can be in their outcomes. I'm in New Jersey, and I can tell you that there's a hospital in the northern part of our state that their rate of cesarean birth is close to 50%. And there's a hospital near me, not far from Asbury Park, New Jersey, and their cesarean rate is around 23, sometimes 28%. But no matter how you look at it, that's almost half your odds. And so when you walk in the door of either hospital, whatever their cesarean rate is the rate that you actually are going to have as your risk factor. So knowing the difference between your hospitals is really important. So now let's talk about birth centers. These offer a more home-like environment. Some hospitals have in-hospital birth centers that are actually a separate section, maybe a different floor of the hospital, and they do operate with different policies. But many hospitals are what we call freestanding. They might be down the street from the hospital, across the street, sometimes on the property, but they're usually within a 5 to 10 minute transport. So if you did find out during labor you need more care, they have a good relationship with the local hospital and it can be an easy transport. But at a birth center, they specialize in low intervention physiologic births. So you're more likely to have access to water for labor and birth to really provide ease and relaxation. More tools for movement and positioning, such as birth balls, peanut balls, and cubs, comfortable upright birth support. Now, I do want to say more and more hospitals are starting to bring in peanut balls, birth balls, and cubs. So definitely ask if that's available in each place that you kind of go and tour. Birth centers encourage labor and birth in upright positions, which can shorten labor and reduce the need for interventions. And more of them offer nitrous oxide, often called laughing gas, which can take the edge off intense sensations without limiting your ability to move or engage with your labor. And again, some facilities, some hospitals are also starting to offer nitrous oxide. So you definitely want to consider all these things. If needed, as I said, birth centers always have protocols in place for a timely, smooth transfer to higher level care or a hospital. One thing to consider though with the birth center is how quickly you return home with your baby. Many birth centers send you home in 12 to 24 hours or less. Now, that may seem quick, but if you have a gentle, pleasurable birth, most people are ready to go home and be in their own bed. Many people after a gentle birth, after they fed their baby and the placenta is born, are truly ready for a shower, ready to get dressed, and ready to go. But this is really important that you have a postpartum doula, a family member, or a friend who will be there to care for you. As doulas, we often say whenever you come home that the first week you want to stay on the bed, meaning people are there to completely serve you. If they nurture you and feed you, then your only job is to love and feed your baby. The second week we say is near the bed, meaning you're still staying in the bedroom. People are caring for you, but we're getting you up and moving around more, but staying near the bed. And week 3 is still in the house, not going out anywhere. So when you think about that as 3 weeks, it's still a little bit less than what traditionally is the 40-day lying in period that many cultures recommend. So wherever you give birth, please learn how long will you stay, and then always consider what is your plan for postpartum care. We'll talk more about that in future episodes, but I want to highlight that hospitals may have slightly longer stays, birth centers might be shorter, more things to consider and put into place. Now, finally, there's home birth. This is the most intimate and personal option. When you give birth at home, you have the comfort of being in your own space, surrounded by a midwife and often a doula. For healthy, low-risk pregnancies, research shows that home birth can be as safe as hospital birth. In fact, it was years ago, I remember being so taken by this study in Canada. They compared the outcomes for the same low-risk individuals who met the same health criteria. And they looked at those who birthed at home versus those that birthed in the hospital, and they had the same midwives. So you got to choose, did you want a hospital birth or a home birth? And what was interesting is the people that gave birth at home with the exact same midwives had lower rates of interventions compared to those who labored in the hospital, even when transfers were necessary. So at some point in labor, they transferred in, their overall rate of interventions was still lower. So as doulas, we were joking that maybe it's breathing the hospital air, because how can it be that the same midwives had different outcomes based on where you labored and birthed? So this really highlights an important point, that we know that your location matters, where you feel safe, where you feel private, where you feel unobserved and undisturbed, as we've talked so much about in prior podcasts. Your environment really matters. As we've talked about, birth is a part of our intimate and sexual life. And so the right place to give birth is the right place that you could be sexy and enjoy an intimate experience. So whatever environment you're choosing, when you tour 2 or 3 hospitals, if you have that many in your area, tour several birth centers if you have more than one in your area, and talk with home birth midwives and think about your own home environment. Which of them, when you walk in and feel it, feels like it's a place that meets your criteria for safe, respectful, private, unobserved, and a place that you can love yourself, love if you have a partner, and love your way through labor to birth your baby in love. So that comes to part 2, which is choosing that birth team, no matter what location you're in. Right? That team is going to have a big impact during labor and birth. So this is a really important decision. So let's break down the key players. They're obstetricians, midwives, and doulas. So obstetricians are often considered the medical experts, right? OBGYNs. And they're medical doctors who specialize in pregnancy, childbirth, and reproductive health. And they are trained to manage high-risk pregnancies, perform surgeries like cesarean sections, do assisted birth like forceps and vacuum, and handle medical emergencies. There's a great film called The Business of Being Born, and they look at and interview 3 obstetric residents in New York City, and they asked them during their training how many of them saw an unmedicated vaginal birth, a physiologic birth that we're calling it. And each one after another said no, no, no. And what most people don't realize is obstetricians are highly specialized, highly trained physicians that are there when you need extra care. But their training is not usually in supporting low-risk physiologic birth. So really important to investigate the different roles. So if you have a health condition that could complicate your pregnancy, or maybe you're expecting multiples, maybe an obstetrician is a good choice for your care. However, it's important to know that obstetricians work in hospital settings where medical interventions like inductions, epidurals, assisted birth, continuous monitoring are more common, even for low-risk pregnancies. So ask yourself, does your obstetrician support natural physiologic birth? What is their rate of interventions and cesarean birth? Do they support using water for labor and birth? Do they use birth balls and peanut balls and movement? How flexible are they with your birth preferences, such as upright birth or avoiding routine interventions? Remember, just because you choose an obstetrician doesn't mean you can't advocate for a low intervention birth. You just need to find one who aligns with your vision. So next are midwives. They're often considered more holistic care providers. Midwives are healthcare professionals trained to support pregnancy and birth as normal physiologic processes. They specialize in personalized holistic care and are more likely to support natural, low intervention births. Midwives work in all settings. Some work in hospitals, some in birth centers or attend home births, and some work in multiple settings. They prioritize building a strong relationship with you throughout pregnancy, supporting both your emotional and your physical well-being, and they do encourage movement, upright birth, and water birth as comfort measures. Midwives are trained to handle emergencies and complications, and they know when to transfer care to a hospital hospital or to collaborate with an obstetrician if necessary. So midwives and doctors are perfect together. They're a good collaborative team. So some things to ask yourself. Do I want a provider who will support a more hands-off physiologic approach? Am I looking for a more intimate, continuous relationship with my care provider? Do you want a physiologic birth with a care provider who will spend more time with you in labor? Most midwives stay with you a great part of the time you're in labor, while obstetricians are often called to come when you're fully dilated and are only there when you're pushing or giving birth. The nurses, who are also wonderful, are really there to care for you during labor and birth when you work with an obstetrician. But remember, nurses often have 2 or more other clients. So when you have an obstetrician at a hospital and the nurses are busy, you're often alone in your room for great periods of time, only with the care team that you've brought. Where midwives in a hospital setting still tend to be in the room more during labor. If you're their only client, they'll sit there all the time. My dear friend Lonnie Morris, she just retired. She would sit in all the time, and she was the knitting midwife. And we always smiled because if she was in the room knitting, we always knew everything was going well. But many midwives spend a great deal of time and are really there with you through labor and birth. Now, in a birth center, that would be the same thing. There might be someone else next door in labor, but they'll be coming in and out and spending a lot of time with you. And certainly in a home birth, the midwife arrives and is just there for you. So you get their undivided, continuous presence. So if you are a low-risk birthing person, a midwife might be the ideal choice to help you achieve the empowered, natural, orgasmic birth you desire. So how about doulas for emotional and physical support? Unlike obstetricians or midwives, doulas are not medical professionals. Instead, they're trained to provide continuous emotional, physical, and informational support before, during, and after birth. So a doula's role, and I've talked about this a lot, as you know, I'm so passionate about doulas. I am a doula trainer and welcome you into my doula workshops if you'd like to provide this care for friends, family member, or community. But doula care helps you create and advocate for your birth preferences. Doulas offer comfort measures like touch, massage, breathing, visualization, changing positions, doing that double hip squeeze and acupressure points, providing emotional reassurance and encouragement to both you and your partner. And they facilitate communication between you, your support people, and your medical team. And studies show that having a doula can shorten labor, reduce the need for pain medication and medical interventions, decrease the likelihood of a cesarean birth, and increase your overall satisfaction with your birth experience. So ask yourself, do I want someone by my side offering continuous, personalized support? Will your partner benefit from someone that will help them to remain calm and confident? Am I looking for a birth advocate who will help me navigate the hospital or the birth center environment and help make sure that your voice and your choice are always heard and considered? While a doula won't replace your midwife or obstetrician, they will enhance your experience by ensuring you feel supported, informed, and empowered every step of the way. One last thing to consider about providers is the time they plan to see you during prenatal care. Obstetricians often only schedule 5 to 10 minutes for each visit. They often have busy waiting rooms, right? And they're moving you through quickly. A hospital midwife often will schedule 15 minutes, so slightly longer, a little bit more time to get to know you. A birth center midwife, your prenatal visit will often be 15 to 30 minutes, and home birth midwives spend almost an hour with you each visit. So the time of the visit alone can give you a very different relationship with your providers. So all across providers, I also want to say that just because they're a doctor doesn't mean they have a lot of interventions. I've been really honored to practice with a few doctors that I always joke their MD stands for midwife in disguise. And there are some midwives, and I hate this term, but I hear it too often, that people call midwives because they're working in hospitals with very high intervention rates. So even though they're midwives, they get caught up or maybe are pressured by the hospital culture to do more. So as much as there are different types of providers, meeting your providers and seeing how you feel, seeing where do they fall in their practice? Do you feel respected? Are your questions encouraged and answered? What model of care do you feel will support you the most? But in the end, it's really ultimately choosing a birth team that aligns with your values, respects your birth preferences, and makes you feel safe and empowered. Whether you choose an obstetrician, a midwife, or both, consider adding a doula to complete your support team. The people you choose will shape your experience in profound ways, so choose wisely and trust your instincts, as this is a day you will never forget. So let's wrap up with some key questions to ask as you plan your birth, and maybe ask these of your providers and facilities. What is their rate of interventions? And this would include inductions, episiotomy, assisted birth, epidurals, cesarean birth. If you're hoping for a vaginal birth after cesarean, what are their VBAC rates? How do they support physiologic birth? So I don't only want to know interventions, I want to know what percentage of their births in the last 3 to 6 months has been physiologic. What are their policies on laboring positions? Do they allow intermittent monitoring? Are you allowed to eat and drink during labor, to move? Do they have the peanut balls, the birth balls, the cub comfortable upright birth? Who can be present during labor and birth? That can often be different. We have hospitals where only your partner and a doula can be there. Some places in the world, only one person, and that's sad because you never want to choose between your partner and a doula. Birth centers and at home, often you can bring the people that feel safe and bring you comfort and confidence. So ask, how many people can be there? How do they handle unexpected situations? So if you are looking at home or a birth center and you do need to transfer, what does that look like? How do they handle it? I always ask about water. You probably know from past episodes, I feel water is the aquadural. Being able to at least labor in water not only speeds labor, but provides so much more comfort and pleasure. And I've been at so many water births that have been such special moments for everyone. People in water are more likely to catch their own baby because they can reach down and just float that baby up. So lots to consider, both from your provider and from your location, to really know all your options, because an empowered birth is about making informed choices that align with your unique needs and desires. So remember, where and with whom you give birth can shape the experience profoundly. Take time to research, to ask questions, to interview different providers, to visit different locations. Choose a birth team that empowers and supports you. And it's never too early to do this. Just a word of caution. Sometimes people think, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. And 9 months goes by quicker than you think. And if you're waiting till you're 36 weeks pregnant and you finally realize you're at the wrong location or you have the wrong provider, it's not always easy to transfer care. Many of our providers fill their practice. So truly, please, if you're hearing this and you haven't conceived yet or you're in your first trimester, now's the time to do that research. If you are later along, still ask. You never know. Sometimes there are providers that can take what we call late transfers. But please share this episode with friends and family. Encourage people to really understand their options, because as I started out, Your risk factor is what door you enter, and your place of birth and your provider are going to make a significant impact on the type of birth that you will experience. So thank you for joining me today. If you found this episode helpful, please rate and review us. As always, stay empowered, stay informed, and birth with confidence and pleasure. Until next time.